dropping out sometimes. Like users would say that they'd get hung up on, and looking at the error messages, it seemed like that was indicative of a capacity problem. Like we had not enough capacity on the server side basically to handle the request rate. But our monitoring tools told us a different story, that we had plenty of capacity. And so we're stumped for a little while until we started analyzing the network traffic on the load balancers. In particular, we looked at the frequency of SYN packets that were arriving. And so a SYN packets are part of TCP, and it marks the start of a new TCP connection. And so timestamping those, each single one of them, gives you a really good, accurate view of the incoming traffic. You see that here. So what you see here is an interval of 16 minutes over which we captured every SYN packet. And you can see right away that it is ridiculously spiky. And these spikes are, aside from being very high and very thin, are also very evenly spaced. If you count them, you'll see that there are 16 spikes in an interval of 16 minutes. And that's no coincidence. These spikes occur at the start of every minute, like precisely at the start of every minute. They last about 1 to 2 seconds only. But you can see that the rate at that point is ridiculously high. It's like 3 to 4 times higher than our average load. Now, our working theory behind this is that this is the result of thousands of continuous integration servers all around the world that are configured to periodically poll their Bitbucket repos. And that in combination with NTP, everybody, I guess, these days uses NTP, and clocks are really accurate, and so this is what you get. And that was a bit of a problem, because even though we have enough capacity for the average rate, during these spikes, we actually don't have enough capacity. Now, solving this, we can't really quadruple our SSH infrastructure to be able to deal with these large spikes. And so what we did instead is we went back into the web layer, into HA proxy, where we basically have a hook into that traffic that comes in. And we configured HA proxy to never forward traffic at a rate higher than what we knew our capacity could take. But then don't make any changes to the ingress side. And so during these spikes, HA proxy will happily accept all the incoming traffic, but it won't actually connect or forward all of the connections at once. And so it sort of spreads it out over a few seconds. And now like this graph on the application server is a lot smoother than it is on the load balancer side. You could probably see it if you have a cron job and you start it at that very start of the minute every time versus any other second. It'll probably have a few seconds less lag. So it's a bit of a funny problem. Never really considered it until it crept up. Probably won't have it really with websites that have humans click on links, but if you operate like a public API that is very popular and people script against it, you might see similar issues. So the application layer then. This is where all the magic happens, sort of. This is where the website runs, and this layer is distributed across many tens of servers, real servers. So they all run a whole bunch of stuff. They run the website. The website is a fairly standard Django app, really. Like Bitbucket started out as a pretty much 100% Django app, and it's still very important. We run that in Gunnycorn, the web server. Gunnycorn, Python web server that is relatively simple. We run it in perhaps the most basic configuration. So we use a sync worker, meaning that our processes process one request at a time. And so we have a whole bunch of processes and multiprocessing to get concurrency. And then SSH, we handle SSH using really just the standard OpenSSHD server daemon, the same one that you all run on your Linux machines and laptops, with one difference. So we made a small change to it, a small patch that allows us to use the database, do lookups in the database for public keys. Like OpenSSHD looks on the file system. It's hardwired to look at the file system to find public keys. It's not practical for us, and so we have a little change to make that happen. Other than that, it is the standard OpenSSHD server, so we don't need to maintain that. We also do background processing, so any sort of job or process that we can't guarantee will respond in a few milliseconds, we dispatch off to our background system. And that's comprised of a cluster of high available
RabbitMQ servers. RabbitMQ is an open source Erlang implementation of AMQP broker. And to consume jobs, we use Celery. So we have a whole farm of celeries distributed across all these machines to process these jobs. Like examples of that are if you fork a repo, for instance, there's actual copying of files involved, so that might not complete immediately. That's dispatched. So it looks very basic, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's the same components that you will run distributed statelessly across multiple servers. There's nothing really special about it. Simple is usually good. We've had this set up for years. Bitbucket is now, I think, over 35 times bigger than it was when we started, when we acquired it, I should say. And this held up really well. However, you can still screw up, as we do from time to time. One of those examples was when we decided to upgrade our password hashes. So up until that time, we never stored passwords in our database, but we stored salted SHA-1 hashes, which is very common. So that means that if somebody, for some reason, gets a hold of our database, they only have hash values, and so they still don't have your password. However, SHA-1 hashes for passwords are slowly being phased out and replaced by more strong, secure hashing algorithms. The reason for that is that even though you can't decrypt a SHA-1 hash to get a password, what you can do is think of a word that might be the password, compute the SHA-1, and then compare it with what's in the database. And if you just think of enough words, and you try enough combinations, you might brute force the password. Now, if you have a strong password, chances of anybody brute forcing that through SHA-1 are, got to be careful with some cryptographers maybe here in the room, but let's call it negligible. However, we have millions of users on Bitbucket, and not everybody has a strong password. And if you have a password that is a word in the dictionary, then, well, I don't have to tell you, I guess, then it's a whole different story, because there really aren't many words in the dictionary, certainly not when it comes to a computer computing SHA-1 values for it. And so you're really at risk. Now, short of forcing people to not use simple passwords, another thing you can do is sort of upgrade to a stronger hash. Now, what these things do, they're nothing special really, but they're hash values or hash algorithms that are more expensive, deliberately more expensive, by rehashing their hash value over and over again, thousands of times, deliberately spending more CPU cycles. And that's what we wanted to upgrade to. And let me show you just how big that difference is. So we wanted to upgrade to bcrypt hashes. Bcrypt is one of the sort of more modern iteration-style cryptographic hash algorithms. And we compared it with SHA-1. So this script measures how many hash values you can generate in 1 second. And for bcrypt, you can see that my laptop was able, so this uses Django's code, so Django's hashing algorithms, all that code, with the with the optional C extensions to make it as fast as you can. On my laptop, that is amounts to 3 hashes per second for bcrypt versus 160,000 for SHA-1. So it's 5 orders of magnitude more expensive, just CPU cycles. And so that is absolutely huge. And it's great because it means that even your weak password may stand a chance. But you have to realize that as a server, you have to incur that cost of that massively expensive calculation every single time somebody uses a password for authentication. And we run a really popular high-volume API, and a lot of people use basic auth for authentication. It's all SSL, right? So it's not like it's plain text passwords. But it means that we have to compute bcrypts for every single request. And our API requests are relatively quick. Like on average, it's in the tens of milliseconds. So you can imagine that if you add a 300 millisecond password check to every single one of these requests, you have a problem. And we did, because we naively rolled this out, and instantaneously the website went down. All cores and all the machines and all CPUs went to 100%, and we're calculating bcrypts. Now we realized our mistake fairly quickly, obviously not quickly enough, but fairly quickly. So we rolled it back, and we're able to keep the downtime minimal. But then we had a bit of a problem, because we still wanted to move away from SHA-1. Now you can't really make bcrypt cheaper. Actually, you can, but you don't want to, because the whole point is to have an expensive algorithm. And so we could do, however, is do less of it. You know, when people use the API to and write a client, they typically do more than one request in quick succession. And so they'd be using the same password over and over again, and we'd be computing the same bcrypt over and over again. And so we decided to implement a sort of two-stage hashing system, where when a request comes in, instead of computing the expensive bcrypt, we now compute a old-fashioned salted SHA-1 value, and then we use that to look up in a in-memory map dictionary the bcrypt value. Now, if that's empty in the beginning, we then compute the bcrypt value ourselves, check it against the database to see if your password was correct, and then store that mapping, like SHA-1 versus bcrypt, in that in-memory table. And then the next request that you make with the same password is able to look up the bcrypt value from the in-memory cache. Now, that way we're able to cut out, I'm guessing, 99% of all the bcrypt calculations. But it's important to understand the ramification of this system, right? Because you might be tempted to think that, well, you've now sort of weakened your bcrypt authentication back down to SHA-1 strength. There's that whole story, right? The important thing, or the main thing, I guess, is that SHA-1 values never hit cold storage anymore. So the database is all bcrypt. So if you get a hold of a database, you still only have bcrypts. And even if you were able to somehow tap into our servers and get a hold of like copy memory access, then you'd get some SHA-1s, but you'd only get SHA-1s from the users that are active at that very moment. Because these cache entries, that's essentially what they are expunged very, very quickly. So we're able to get this thing running and upgrade to bcrypt, but even then, like the remaining sort of 1% of the time that we spent on bcrypt is still very significant. Very significant. Just look at that ratio, right? 160,000 versus 3. And right now, today, if you look at one of our servers and you run like a perf top or something, you can see that the bcrypt cipher method is the most expensive method that runs on that machine. And at any point in time, I think it eats like 12% CPU. So it's still hugely expensive. So in the future, I guess, we should probably be looking at migrating or offering something like an alternative to basic auth, maybe, you know, like relatively standard HTTP auth tokens, which are revocable and have a limited privilege set.